Okay, so continuing with mood disorders, let's talk a little bit about depression and the susceptibility to depression around the world and between the sexes. So what we're seeing here is the green bars are the males and the red bars are the females. And then we've got different countries that have provided their diagnostic numbers for major depression. So this is the percentage of adults experiencing major depression in the previous 12 months. So you'll see that the USA has a fairly high number. I'm looking at this chart, which is new to this edition of our textbook, and they've changed the chart. They took off some of the countries that have higher rates than the U.S. There are a lot of countries that have higher rates than the U.S., but they seem to have taken those off of this chart. Okay, so you'll see that we appear to be the highest among the groups that they've chosen to present here. You'll notice that the females are almost twice as high as the males in pretty much every data collection. Spain has a reversal, but pretty much every point has the females outnumbering the males by a significant number. And that's so you'll see some variation across culture. Japan has very low rates. Korea used to be on this chart, and Korea has even lower numbers than Japan. And then the U.S., we're pushing 10% of women, about 6% of men have depression. And so it varies by culture, and it varies by sex. Now let's talk about culture for a second first, because it's hard to tell whether Japan and Korea have really low numbers because there's very little depression in those cultures, or if they have low numbers because there is a reluctance to report symptoms in those cultures. Some cultures are very reluctant. Members of those cultures are very reluctant to show weakness, to tell anybody that they might have a mental disorder, right, have any mental health issues. And so when you see really low numbers, it doesn't necessarily mean that the people within that culture don't have the symptoms. And that takes us back to the U.S. numbers and seeing how, well, pretty much around the world, men are much less likely than women to suffer from depression. One interpretation is that women are more likely to report their symptoms to their doctor. Men are much less likely to report their symptoms. Men are much more likely to self-medicate when they have symptoms. So they drink, they use recreational drugs, or they use prescription drugs to help them through their symptoms. And so it's possible that the rates among men of actual experiences of symptoms might be closer to what women experience, but men don't want to report them. The other explanation for why worldwide you see women having higher rates than men is that women do have hormonal fluctuations that can contribute to depression, particularly after childbirth, but actually monthly women can have cycling hormones that can cause them to experience symptoms of depression. So if there's an actual difference in what people are experiencing, if we take out that reporting issue and just think about what people are going through, it's possible that women have higher rates because women have things going on in their bodies that can cause their brain chemistry to be different and can cause symptoms of depression. So let's talk a little bit about what causes mood disorders. And of course, we're going to do the same different perspectives that I did on the last, on anxiety disorders. So biology, of course, we're always going to say, well, there may be predispositions towards depression or mania. And that predisposition might take the form of genetic predisposition. What they've been looking at across the DNA map is that certain people seem to have genes that may be related to the depression that they're experiencing. So it could be that we inherit a tendency. They think it may be about 85% of the differences among us can be attributed to the variations in the genes that we carry. So if you have a close loved one who suffers from depression, your risk for depression is significantly higher than the general population. So it might be genetic. It could be the way that our brains are structured. And of course, genes can cause the way that our brain is structured. But our brain also gets structured in the womb, and we would call that congenital. It also gets shaped by our experiences in the world. So when we see brain differences, we're not exactly sure what caused the brain differences. But we've found that people who are depressed have smaller frontal lobes than people who aren't depressed. And some people argue that the size of the frontal lobe is a symptom of the depression, not a cause. So we're not exactly sure what it means to have a smaller frontal lobe and then also have depression. We do know that there are fewer axons within the brain in people who have bipolar disorder. And so that implies that the neurons are not communicating in the same way as a person who doesn't have bipolar disorder. So it could be that the way that our brains are organized can cause the mood disorders, but of course, like I said, our mood disorders can also cause these structures. Neurotransmitters are the main thing that we all talk about when we talk about treating depression. We are usually talking about medication that's going to try to target serotonin, norepinephrine, maybe dopamine. So those are neurotransmitters that can be in depression, they are too low. And so we strive to raise the levels of those neurotransmitters through different kinds of medication. Bipolar disorder, it seems to be pretty much narrowed down to just norepinephrine as the culprit, and that what's happening in bipolar disorder is that it fluctuates. Sometimes you have too much, and sometimes you have too little. Sometimes you have too much, sometimes you have too little. And that's what triggers bipolar disorder. Now here's an example of a rapid cycler, like I mentioned earlier, that some people who have manic depression will go through the cycle faster than average. Here's a rapid cycler who is on about a 10-day cycle. So they're in their depressed state in the PET scan on the left, and the cool colors show us that the person is depressed. They don't have very much brain activity going on. The only part of their brain that's showing any reasonable amount of activity is their visual cortex, which is on the bottom, that's yellow, probably because they have their eyes open. In the next panel, you see them in their manic state the very next day, and suddenly you see all these hot colors, the yellows and the oranges and the reds. Those are areas of a great deal of activity going on in the manic phase. And then 10 days later, they're in their depressed state again, and again you see the blues and greens and purples, so low levels of activity. This may be, what we may be seeing right here is the fluctuation of the norepinephrine, so that you're getting this lack of activity when there's too little norepinephrine going on, and then all of a sudden all sorts of activity going on when there's too much norepinephrine. Okay, what about learning? Maybe we have, again, overgeneralized a conditioned response. Maybe we've learned that certain circumstances are hopeless, and so we've generalized to other circumstances and started to treat them like they're hopeless, and that can lead us to display depressive symptoms when we think that there's no point in trying, that it's never going to get better. Those are depressed things to be thinking. So it could be that we actually have learned from the past and we're misapplying that learning in the present. Cognitive appraisals, you know, one of the main theories on depression in particular is that we are incorrectly appraising our situation, and we are inappropriately blaming ourselves for things that really aren't our fault. We are criticizing ourselves for things that we should realize that a lot of people make those kinds of mistakes, stuff like that. So when we get to therapy, when we talk about cognitive therapy, you're going to see that a lot of the treatment is going to be focused on changing the way that the person thinks about their situation. So I tried to draw a little flow chart with my little arrows. It didn't come out super neat. But here, whenever we talk about cognition, we're always going to see that there's going to be a reciprocal determinism diagram, like we saw in personality theory, where you have multiple factors. We've got brain chemistry, we've got the way that you think about things, that's your cognitions, and then we've got mood, right, either manic or depressed. And, you know, it's possible that brain chemistry causes your moods, and that brain chemistry causes the way that you think about things. But it's just as likely that the mood that you're in can feed your brain to secrete certain neurochemicals. And so your brain chemistry is shaped in part by the mood that you're in. and that the things that you're thinking can affect your brain chemistry and cause certain areas of your brain to fire, neurons to fire and things like that. And then of course your mood and your cognitions are interrelated, right? The way that you think about things is going to affect your mood just as much as your mood is going to affect the way that you think about things. So we've got that reciprocal determinism going on again that I talked about in an earlier chapter. Okay, here's our depressive explanatory style. Okay, so you break up with your romantic partner. Okay, now, if your assumption is that the problem is stable, that you are never going to get over this, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to find anyone as good as this. This was the greatest relationship ever, and I'm always going to feel like this. I'm always going to feel this bad. That is going to take us down the side of this equation where we're going to feel more depressed. If, on the other hand, you're on the right-hand side where it's temporary and you think, this is hard. I really liked the person that, I was dating or whatever, but you know what? I'm going to get through this. I'm not always going to feel like this. Time heals all wounds, whatever it is. It's funny that I'm lecturing on this because just yesterday my daughter told me, time does heal all wounds. She recently broke up with a romantic partner, like 2 months ago, and she goes, it's shocking how it's not, I don't feel, heartbroken over it anymore. It's not that she's wiped her memory, but I mean, she doesn't feel like she did in the initial phase. And that's life. Life goes on, right? So if you can say, well, that's life, it's temporary, things will come along, you're less likely to become depressed. If you think that the problem is global, without my partner I can't seem to do anything right, that I not only did my romantic partner decide that I wasn't worthy, but you know what, my boss probably doesn't think I'm worthy, that my teachers probably don't think I'm worthy, that everybody I meet thinks that I'm a loser. I'll bet that's how it is. When you feel like every part of your life is being assessed in the same way by others, that it's always going to be like this, and it's going to be like this in every avenue of my life, that's more likely to make you feel depressed. Whereas if you say it's specific, that okay, that's true, I broke up with my partner, but I have a good strong family support, I have good friends, I'm not alone. If you can recast it as I'm still a valuable human being, it's this heartache is specific to this one relationship, not to my life. You're less likely to become depressed. If the problem is internal, our breakup was all my fault. We broke up because, what, I do not deserve love because I'm a bad person, or I'm unlovable, or something like that. That kind of internal attribution is more likely to make you depressed. If you instead make an external one, like, what, it takes two to make a relationship work. I guess it wasn't meant to be. We weren't right for each other. Even if you get to this point of saying something like, well, now that we've broken up, I realize what a loser he or she is. Oh my gosh, what was I even doing? You know what, frankly, that's better for your mood than it is to say it's because of me and I'm never going to find someone else, right? So even if you have to blame the other person to make it an external attribution, that's psychologically healthier than to blame yourself for everything. So if you go down the left side, you're much more likely to become depressed. If you, on the other hand, go down the right-hand side, you're more likely to successfully cope. Now, like I said at the very beginning of this chapter when I said, if it's all about justification, right? If there's a rational reason for why you're feeling the way that you are, then we're not going to diagnose you with a disorder. If, on the other hand, okay, you had your opportunity to feel like that and it's time to move on, then we're going to call it a disorder. So yeah, right after you break up with your romantic partner, you're allowed to mire in it for a little while and go, gosh, oh no, this is horrible. That's fine. Say, I'm never going to get over this. And everybody else goes, oh yes you are, don't worry, you'll find someone else. And you're like, oh, I'll never find anyone else. It's like this, I can't find anybody at school to be friends with. Like if you think it's global at the moment, that's fine. The key thing is, for most people who are non-depressed, a day or a couple of days feeling like that, and then they start to move into the temporary, specific, and external attributions, where they start to say, well, you know what, I'll find someone else. I normally don't have problems with romantic partners. There must have been something specific about this relationship that made it hard, or that the other person was just as responsible for the breakup as I was. Anything like that, you're going to have successful coping in the long run. Yes, I did just say blame your romantic partner when you break up. I think that's all we have to remember from that little lecture, right? Now, depression is a vicious cycle, because what can happen, if we're going to talk about explanatory styles, is that, okay, let's say that you experience some kind of stressful experience. Let's say you broke up with your romantic partner. And let's say that you use that negative explanatory style, where you say that it's, global, that it's permanent, that it's, internal. If you make all those kinds of explanations, and it leads to you feeling negative, you start to develop a depressed mood. That depressed mood can cause you to view everything that you experience through this new negative set of cognitions. You may start to engage in behaviors that are more that coincide with depression, like being unmotivated or not experiencing pleasure with anything. And that's going to make normal things start to feel stressful. So just going to work starts to feel stressful, or just going out with your friends to do something fun starts to feel stressful. And then when you have a stressful experience, like you went out with your friends and you didn't have any fun, and then you explain it as, well, because I'm a loser and I don't deserve to ever have anything fun and it'll never get any better, right? Then that makes you more depressed, and then of course that changes the way you think about things and it makes life more stressful. So the cognitive appraisal's explanation says that we kind of get stuck in depression because of this little cycle that we get ourselves into. Okay, let me stop here. I'll come back and pick up with the natural selection explanation.